Radio Mano Papachango.
Hey Chris, Zonny here. Just wanted to say I'm a big fan of the podcast. Been jamming you while I'm painting away, doing some art, and just really interesting ideas, man. I remember meeting you in Chiang Mai, Thailand, right before COVID hit, and we had no idea what the next year was going to be, but just been jamming your podcast nonstop, and lots of love, man.
Yes, that seems long ago and far away, but I guess it wasn't so long ago in terms of clock time. Historical time's another issue. I'm in Big Sur right now. Thank you, Zani, from Thailand. I remember you, and your paintings are fucking awesome. I had no idea, I think, when I met you, even what you did, but checked out your work online. Really beautiful. Hey, I'm in Big Sur. Strange, on the van trip, camping at a place called Lime Kiln State Park, right on the beach. Beautiful redwood groves. Strange weather. It's like freezing cold in the shade and super hot in the sun. Can't really find the comfort zone, but I shouldn't complain because from what I hear, there's a massive heat wave hitting the southwest. Temperatures over 100 degrees in many places. So hope you're doing all right if you're out there in that mess. This episode is with my friend, very close friend, Richard Schweid. He's an awesome dude. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard a previous conversation with him. I think this might be his third appearance on the podcast. Richard's a writer, but he's also an activist. I don't even know if he would consider himself an activist, interestingly. But Richard's writing is very, what's the word? It's not overtly political, but he's an interesting man who's concerned about the state of the planet, the state of humanity. He's very concerned about justice and kindness, and to me he's in the tradition of Mark Twain or Kurt Vonnegut. His writing isn't overtly humorous, although he certainly conveys humor when he sees it or when it occurs to him, but it's much more than it seems on the surface. Richard has written books about everything from chili peppers to eels to cockroaches to how various cultures conceive of death. He's an octopus. Whatever grabs his curiosity, and he's got a very grabby curiosity, he goes off on it, and a book comes out of him. And his latest book is about people who care for other people professionally, and not doctors or firefighters, but people who come to your house when you're old and cook for you and clean up and give you your meds and turn you over and try to keep you alive. And these are people who are working for minimum wage, mostly women, mostly immigrants. And it's a strange, exploitative world that we have just sort of accepted, and it's kind of heartbreaking because This is work you can only do if you are a giving person, if you are compassionate, deeply compassionate. And it's so important. And yet, in our very strange, very sad society, somehow these people are valued as nothing. They're valued at the bottom. They're paid as little as they can be paid, and in many cases, the people they work for, the companies they work for, are just exploiting the fuck out of them, getting all this government money and paying their workers as little as possible. But hey, that's capitalism, right? That's what makes the world go round. That's what brings us all our amazing improvements that make life so wonderful. As I said, I'm camping at this state park on the beach in Big Sur. Really interesting, beautiful place. And being in California is strange. California just officially opened up yesterday, I think. Masks are not required if you have been vaccinated. Of course, there's no way to prove, and no one's asking you to prove you've been vaccinated. But it's really interesting how my perspective on this has shifted, because as you may remember, my thing 6 months ago was, what the fuck is wrong with you people? Wear a goddamn mask when you're in public, right? Because it can slow transmission, and you might have the virus, you might be shedding virus, and wearing a mask will protect people around you to some extent. Now that I've been vaccinated and I'm not wearing a mask, I start to notice all the people who are, and now I'm wondering what's motivating them. What's going on? I mean, I just walked down to the beach and there was a woman wearing a mask sitting on the beach alone. On a beach. Wind blowing in her face. Coming in off the Pacific Ocean. Does she think the fucking virus is blowing over from China across the ocean right up her nose? Why the fuck is she wearing a mask on the beach alone? And why are people I see people driving down the road in LA wearing a mask alone in their car. What's going on? What are they thinking? Is it just that people aren't capable of thinking beyond mask equals protection, therefore wear a mask at all times? Is there not any capacity for nuance beyond that? You know what I mean? It's just so fucking weird. I don't understand people. I really don't. It's all a mystery to me. But I understand Richard Schweid to some extent, and I love this guy. I admire him very much. Richard has been around the block a time or two, as they say. He has had lifetimes of experience. I think he told me, I don't know if it was on the podcast or not, but like one of his first jobs was like an assistant to a snake oil salesman or something. Like going, I don't know, maybe I'm mixing it up with some Mark Twain story, but I remember something about that, like, or in a circus or something like that. I don't know. Richard's an interesting guy. He's been all over the place. He's one of the few people I know that I would actually consider to be wise in some extent, to some extent. He's wise in the sense that he would deny any claim to wisdom, of course. But that's how you know when someone's wise, when they tell you they're not. Richard would definitely tell you he's not. All right, I am going to just jump right into it without any further ado. A little more ado. We had our meetup in LA. It was awesome. It was so cool. This guy Ryan wrote to us, and I didn't know him, and he just said, "Hey, I know this place. It's the end of a dirt road. It's outside of L.A. It's really cool. The woman who owns it's great, and I do some. I think he has a studio there where he does music and painting, and anyway, we just went with it, and it was at the end of a dirt road. It was probably 6 miles back a dirt road. Last spot, beautiful property, just beautiful. And Lynn, the woman who owns it, made tacos, and everyone was just hanging out. People showed up, I don't know, 30, 40 people showed up. Just awesome people. Everybody was great. And it was such a nice, I get bitter. I get confused and angry, and when I see what we're doing to the planet and see what we do to each other, and I can get kind of down into that. And it's so awesome when we have these things, and I'm just talking to, one amazing, cool, kind, smart person after another, and they just and they're hanging out together, and Lynn, the woman, was like, "Oh, I thought all these people knew each other. They're all just so friendly and relaxed." And I said, "No, none of them know each other. I mean, except who they came with, and I don't know any of them." It makes me feel good about humanity, is what I'm saying. So if you're ever in a place where we're doing one of these things, I really encourage you to come out. Not so much to meet me, just to meet each other, because in my experience, you're some pretty awesome people. And so we're doing another one in Santa Cruz tomorrow, but I don't have any Wi-Fi, so you probably won't hear this until tomorrow or afterwards. But then we're going to try to do one somewhere in Idaho, don't know where. We'll do one in Oregon, Grass Valley, California. I'm not sure where else, but we're going to do them around, maybe up in Montana, maybe Whitefish, Montana, if anyone's up there. Anyway, check my website, thatchrisryan.com. Under About, you'll see of Anthropology link. Click on that, and that'll update where we're doing them, when we're doing them, how we're doing them, and if you have any suggestions on locations that we could use. We're trying to keep them outside, COVID friendly, of course, and a place where people can bring some beers or some wine or whatever, and just hang out and have a good time. So hope you can join us for one of those. I'm doing them together with Anya Kotz and her audience, who are also awesome. And we're doing the one in Santa Cruz with Kyle Tierman, so it'll be a triple threat. All right, thanks for listening to this. This is Richard Schweid, awesome dude, whom I admire very much. And you'll see why when you listen to a bit of this. Take care. This is another commercial-free, bullshit-free episode of Tangentially Speaking. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am here with one of my favorite people in the world and one of my favorite writers, Richard Schweid. Welcome, brother.
Thank you very much, brother. It's great to be here. It's nice to see you. It's been a little while since we had a chance to talk.
It has, yeah, man. I can't even remember the last time we hung out. Richard is in Barcelona, and we met each other there, God, years ago. I don't know. I can't even say 15 years ago, 20 years. I don't know. Did we meet playing poker or?
That's right. We did meet playing poker, and it was a couple of decades back, I do believe. But I don't think I've seen you since I was able to, since I was unable to go out of the house without a mask, for sure.
Oh, no, I haven't been to Spain since the whole COVID thing started. So, yeah. I haven't been to Spain, I went very briefly when a friend died, I went over just for 3 days to be with his wife, who's my ex-girlfriend, Peggy. Did you ever meet Peggy?
Sure, I did, and I remember he had some sort of degenerative disease.
Yeah, Nacho. Yeah. He died from multiple sclerosis.
That's it.
So
yeah,
that was. Yeah. Go ahead.
We had dinner at your house at one point on the balcony. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I just went back. I went over very briefly just to spend a few days with her, and that I haven't been to Spain other than that probably in 3 years. I'm hoping to come this summer if the virus allows us. We were talking before we started recording about the situation. It looks like things are getting better. A lot of vaccine being distributed in Spain, so maybe by midsummer they'll let us back in.
I bet they will. They'll let you back in, and gladly, because the number one thing on the list of priorities is getting the tourists to come back.
Yeah.
They want to open up. There's not a lot of economic activity going on here without tourists. So you'll be able to come over.
So Richard's latest book, The Caring Class, dude, I first of all, I have to apologize. I haven't read the whole book. I'm recording like 3 podcasts a day at this point because I've only got Wi-Fi for another couple of weeks, so I'm cranking them out. But I did look at it, and man, you are such a good writer. The book is about home healthcare workers, and I opened it up thinking like, oh, it's going to be kind of a dutiful, not a fun read, but I got sucked into it immediately. The way you described the journey of like you had no intention to write about this, you were doing a little research, and there's the double entendre that you were taking a class just to do research, a caring class, and now and there's also a class of people who are doing this work. And it turns into, like all of your books, it turns into this very personal journey that's just so much fun to read. I sort of went through and I was, I really like, I don't know about you as a writer, but for me, when I get the first sentence of something, that's like half of the work. Like in that first sentence, I kind of know where I'm going and what I'm trying to say. It's all in that first sentence. And I read like the first paragraph of each of the chapters, and they're fucking hilarious. Some of them are really moving and touching and surprising, and like, I mean, that one there's a dialogue where like a guy finds a condom inside his wife. It turns into, I mean, you just like, I'm not expecting to read stories like that in a book like this. It's fantastic, man.
That's good, man. I wasn't really expecting. I was lucky because, in some sense, I was lucky. The women in the class that I took that were, training to be home health care aides, they're not so lucky because it's incredibly tough work. They get minimum wage, this and that. But for me, to get to spend like a month, 6 weeks with women of color who are studying to be home health care aides, it was great. I mean, I enjoyed it thoroughly. They were just warm and kind and funny, and I had a really good time, as well as learning a lot. And that's wouldn't have been possible in real life, and as it were. I mean, there's not a group of people that I would have encountered or been able to spend a month getting to know. So that was really pleasant for me. That was Plus, the book unfolds in the South Bronx, which is somewhere that I had hardly ever been. We were in the South Bronx once filming Balseros in 2004, 2003. But I'd never spent any time in the South Bronx, and it's a really interesting place. Very, very interesting place. Very interesting part of Manhattan. So.
Yeah. I've been to the South Bronx a few times. I had a girlfriend from there, the Grand Concourse, I remember.
Yeah.
was where her mother lived. And when I first moved to New York in like 1984 or 5, I was so naive about the city, man. I had no idea what anything was, and I was going there to be around her primarily. And so I remember I went and looked at some apartments in the South Bronx, thinking I was going to move in, and I just remember walking down the street and people looking at me like, "What are you doing here, man?" You know, like. And then I like go and look at the apartment, and even the real estate people were like, "What are you doing here? This is not a place for you, white boy."
Yeah, no, this kind of the opposite of what happens if you're black and you go to look at an apartment. In most places, you know, you walk in, the realtor's eyes kind of widen and wonders what you're doing. No, the South Bronx is really, you know, the amazing thing about it that surprised me was that it's full of blocks with big old trees and nice 2-story brick homes with little yards and bigger backyards, and it's, you know, it's very, there's a lot of it like that looks as if it would be prime real estate for development, except that it's a long hours subway ride to White Manhattan, and you know, it's only the fact that there's so many minority neighborhoods there. That's the only reason that it's not tremendously developed and totally out of reach economically. And little bit by little bit, they are gentrifying the South Bronx. You know, they're kind of working their way up. But they've got a ways to go yet.
Yeah. I remember I got a job in construction in New York as working with this millionaire dude that I worked with. And we had a dinner, me and him and the contractor that was going to be running the job. And it was in a restaurant in the Bronx. And I remember going up there, and it was like, you know, tenement housing, you just, you know, what you would think about when you think of the South Bronx. And then from one block to the next, it was like residential suburbia, like manicured lawns and all this. And they explained to me that was the Italian neighborhood. Yeah. And there was this sort of, you may as well have been the Berlin Wall there. Like, you don't cross the street. If you're not Italian, you don't cross that street. And it was like total mafia, kind of mobbed up. Very strange.
Yeah, no, there are some small Italian enclaves out there, mostly at the end of the various subway lines. And everything, I mean, I read about this in the book because the first place I lived was an Italian neighborhood, and there was like, you know, 3 places to get cannolis on a Sunday morning. There was like all kind of delicious coffee. There was just about anything my little heart desired that way, you know. But then you go 15 minutes from there, and you're in the middle of a neighborhood, you know, that's entirely Caribbean or West Indian, and you know, there hadn't been an Italian in that neighborhood in decades. I mean, it's curious, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And everything that goes on there is kind of, you know, it has the neighborhood's kind of characteristics are at the core of everything that's happening in any given neighborhood. So it's curious for sure.
Have you ever lived in New York?
I have, yeah. I lived first, well, you know, I was born and raised in Nashville, and all I wanted to do as a teenager was go to New York. And I went up with my parents. I had an aunt and uncle that lived on Long Island, and we went up, I can remember it really clearly, I was about 13. We went up to visit them. And one night we went into the city to eat at Minetta's in the village, in Greenwich Village. And it was a summer night. And as we drove toward that restaurant through Greenwich Village, I saw all these people sitting out on their stoops. You know, some of them having a drink, some of them having a smoke, just sitting out and relaxing and talking. And I thought, whoa, this is definitely looks good to me. I'd like to leave Nashville immediately and come here. And as soon as I was able to leave Nashville, I did go there. And so I've lived in a variety of neighborhoods in New York, but never in the Bronx, huh? Yeah.
Manhattan?
In Manhattan, yeah. And that year when I went up, I worked summers in New York. I worked in the stockroom of Doubleday Bookstore for a couple of summers, and lived on the Lower East Side on East 4th Street. And and then we moved over to the West Side, to the West Village, and lived way over on 11th Street, right over by the river. And then I also lived up on 72nd and Broadway at one point. Yeah.
So what years were you down in the Village?
I was down in the Village 1964, 65.
Wow.
In the summer.
So was the Village, was the scene like that whole Bob Dylan, the sort of folk music in cafes, was that happening at that point?
It was happening at that point. And then actually we moved from there over to Christopher Street. A couple of friends of mine and I moved over to Christopher Street. And that was, then that folk thing was definitely happening. And that's, we ran into Emmylou Harris and spent a lot of time with her in that time. And she was very much involved in that whole thing. She and I both went from New York to Nashville. Yeah, that was all going on there. But, we were poor as shithouse rats. We didn't have any money. So we didn't go to a lot of clubs. One thing we used to do was take the subway uptown and go to salsa clubs and just buy the cheapest thing we could buy, a beer, and just sit at the table and watch people dance. I mean, those were the great years of salsa also. Ray Barreto and Willie Colon, and it's fantastic. That was great. Yeah.
And where were they? Were they in the
Spanish Harlem, below Harlem,
right.
Up around probably West Side, 100, 110th, up that way, I had a friend who was really into that music, fortunately, and he would take me up there. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, my first apartment in New York was 106 in Lexington.
Yeah.
That's where I ended up. Luckily I didn't get a place in the South Bronx, but not too far.
Yeah, you were.
In 1985. Yeah.
South Bronx was a no-go territory in those years. There was no joke what was going on in those years in the South Bronx. That's when it earned its terrible reputation. But I mean, it's amazing. In the course of the book, I visited some people in the South Bronx who were receiving home health care. And they're just like a real wide gamut of living situations. I mean, some of those housing projects, high-rise housing projects, are still in the South Bronx that house an awful lot of people. That's hard living. It's really hard living, It's tough. It's really tough. And then there's other places that are, really nice. And then, like you said, you get up to Riverside or something like that, and it's a lot of money living up there,
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is just your career as a writer. You have such an interesting career in the sense that, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but my impression is that you use writing to go where you want to go. You don't really write for money. You're not taking assignments.
That's for sure.
No, but seriously.
Damn right about that, son. Yeah.
I really admire it because I think so many people, who want to write, it's such a difficult career path that so many people are like, okay, I'm going to write. I'll do anything. Whatever they'll pay me to do, I'll do it. But I look at your career and it's like, man, you ping pong all over the place, fucking eels and chili peppers and, how do people conceive of dying around the world? I mean, your books are really, I feel like, a map to your interests and where what you want to learn and what you want to investigate. And it's almost as if the book is an afterthought in a way. Is that accurate?
This is true. This is very definitely true, and it speaks to your acute perception. That's so evident in those books. No, for me, I mean, I really love to write, but I'm not a literary writer, and I have basically. Actually, the first book that really inspired me to be able to write was a book by John McPhee, Oranges. Because when I read Oranges, I realized that anything is interesting and that everything is connected. And,
right.
If you get curious about one little thing, if you pull on the string of that one little thing a little bit, it opens up to connect itself to lots of different things. And so basically, just like I was saying about the class in the Bronx, that I would not have been able to spend a month or 6 weeks with a bunch of young minority women living in the South Bronx. And this was a good way to spend every day, all day, in their company. And it seemed to me like just a curious thing, and I was also curious about the Bronx. I mean, so, and basically that's been the motive for all of my books is, that's an odd thing. The Eel Book was a book about eels, started down there in the Albufera when I was having breakfast with a couple of people. We were working on a story down there, and the guy served us these eels for breakfast, and he told us this story about where they came from, that they were all born in the Sargasso Sea, and they drifted for years before they got to a river in Spain and then into the Albufera. And I thought, I don't know who told this guy this bill of goods, but they did a good job with it. Who could possibly believe that this was the case? And yet, of course, it turned out to be the case. Those kinds of things, being a writer has given me sort of a way to go places and meet people that I was interested and would not have ever had a chance to either go and meet if I wasn't writing a book,
Yeah.
So every so often, you run into somebody that says, no, you can't interview me, man. I don't want to be interviewed. I want to be in a book. But most people, are glad to talk about their lives to you. I'm a big, I'm a big fan of Studs Terkel, who was a precursor to the podcast, if ever there was one, and whose books, they're wonderful. They just all they do is to give you word for word what the people said in his interviews, but. It's great stuff, Henry Mayhew back in 19th century England, same thing, they give you a sense of some place you don't know how it was, you don't know how the average person felt, and it's great reading. So, I mean, those are my heroes, along with McPhee. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always thought of you together with Studs Terkel.
Yeah.
Not only because of the kind of, very highly observational, and you turn the mic over to people very readily. You let them talk and you record what they're saying. I mean, your work is so interesting because all the books of yours that I've read, you're present in the book. You're very present, but your ego is not present, if that makes sense to me. It's never a book about Richard,
no.
But it's always your journey, and it's very easy to sort of get behind your eyes and see things as you're going through, because you're allowing yourself to be surprised as the book unfolds before you. It feels like you're allowing it to happen very organically.
Well, good, thanks. I'm glad that happens. I mean, for me, it's always been the only purpose. As you know all too well, it's hard as hell to write a book, and it is not an easy process. Even I'm sure for Studs, who only had to sort of write down what he recorded, he had to listen to all those tapes. But it's hard to write a book. So, for me, the only way to make it at all interesting is to sort of put myself and the reader in the same set of eyes, so that as I learn about something that I want to learn about, if I can sort of explain that process well, then the reader can also learn about them at the same time as they can enjoy reading about it,
Yeah.
So I'm glad that works for you. You can be sure.
Yeah. Well, and also another thing you have in common with Studs Terkel, I think, is a sort of instinctive sympathy for regular people. Like, I don't see a lot of movie stars and fashion models in your work.
No.
It's you're down on the ground. You seem to be much more interested in, the common person's experience of things.
Definitely, yeah, and also, I mean, many times now that I'm an old geezer, I've found that many times people who I thought were sort of just doing an everyday kind of job, 20 or 30 years after you talk to them, you find, geez, he really had a lot to say, this person. I find myself, for instance, you and I both, I'm sure, used to use cassette tapes. I wound up giving a lot of those tapes to various state libraries or archives here or archives there because they're interesting. And the people that I'm interviewing are interesting. And as average as people may be, there ain't no two, it's like snowflakes, there ain't no two of them alike. So,
yeah.
You never can tell. But
yeah.
Of course I like to talk to, just average everyday people, because there is no such thing as an average. It doesn't seem like there is, and everybody is looking out from behind their eyes, and there's nobody looking out from behind their eyes who thinks of themselves as an average everyday person, because they're not. They are the universe. And it's no different for any of us, but it's interesting to talk to people in different circumstances who are doing different things and see how that plays out for them. No?
In some way, when I ask that question, how sometimes you'll say something and it sort of echoes in your head for a while. As I asked that question, I said, you like talking with common people. That word common was clanking around in my mind. I was like, no, that's the wrong word, because the whole point is that they're not common. They're not the same. They're not, everyone's different. And that's the whole point of what you're doing, is exposing, sort of bringing out the uniqueness of these people. Even if it's a fucking taxi driver, it's a woman who's, taking care of an old person for minimum wage. She's a fascinating person with a fascinating story. That's the whole point.
Well, that's right. And I mean, everybody's like that. It just, to me, it's sort of how would you describe it? It's the oddest thing about being alive, is that we are all in our own particular lives, looking out of our own particular set of eyes at everybody else. It just always strikes me as a different, it's a knot, it's a mystery, so I don't know. That's how I enjoy doing it anyhow.
Yeah, yeah.
It's been interesting.
How many books
writing for sure?
How many books have you written at this point?
I don't know, probably a dozen, all told.
I love when the answer to that question is, I don't know, probably. It's like, it's funny.
I think but there's some books that you can't hardly count. You know what I mean? It's not, and also, I have to say that what you said was very sweet. But there are many times when I've been perfectly willing to write anything. If somebody sends me an email and says, look, I think you'd be good to write about this stick, I just say, take a picture of the stick and send it to me, you know. It's fine. I mean, whatever is, whatever comes up is okay. I've been for a long time, I've done a lot of different kinds of work that people have requested, but it's certainly true, you know, there's not a lot of money in it for me, but I'm okay, you know, I'm comfortable. So,
yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. Well, all right, last bit of smoke I'm going to blow up your ass here is that when I read your work, I always think about something my father told me a long time ago when we were talking about writing. And he said, when you write, it should sound like you're sitting at the bar talking with your friends. You're telling a story to your buddies, and that's invites the reader in, and, you know, and there's a friendliness and a familiarity, and I always get that tone when I read your stuff.
That's great.
I mean, it's complicated because you are my buddy, so, and I hear your voice, you know, when I read your stuff, but I think people who don't even know you would get that same feeling from reading your work.
Well, I hope so.
Are there any of your books that really stand out? I mean, I know in a way it's, you know, books are like children, maybe you don't want to, you know, compare them that way, but are there any of the books that you've written that were particularly fun or particularly enlightening or surprising?
Yeah, I mean, I think they all have been that way in a certain way. All the ones that I really like, which are probably, I don't know, say 8 of a dozen. And they all have brought me, I mean, each of them has brought me very distinct things, you know, all of which I carry around with me now. Now, all the books, I mean, to me, I wrote a book about the Mississippi Delta and I wrote a book about Cuba. And both of those books exist on the same plane for me, you know. The Mississippi Delta was as strange a place to me as Santiago de Cuba, and that was pretty strange. And it's the people that I have met. I wrote a book years ago about catfish farming in the Mississippi Delta. It was a really interesting subject to me. None of these, all these circumstances change. They don't farm catfish like they used to in the Delta, and they don't necessarily live like they used to either. And in Cuba, things have changed a whole lot since I was there too. And hopefully, home health care, man, I was just astounded, to learn what's being asked of these women to do for minimum wage. And one thing I found was, remarkably, I talked to just lots of women who really love their work. And to me, to find a minimum wage job where people will say to you, listen, I've been doing this for 20 years, and God willing, I'll do it till I fall over dead. And I heard it time and again from these women. Tell me some other minimum wage job, where people feel that way about it. I mean, it's a remarkable class of people that do that work, that do it well. It's like any other kind of job. There are people that do that work and they steal from some helpless old person, or they do it poorly, or they don't. But a lot of home health care aides really love their work and they do a hell of a good job. And it's a tough, as many people in the United States or in anywhere who've had to take care of somebody with Alzheimer's, somebody in a wheelchair or bedbound, it ain't that fucking easy, mate. It's a really difficult thing just to do it okay, much less to do it really well. But if you don't do it okay, somebody can die, It's not like if you leave the kitchen dirty because you've been hired a minimum wage to mop the floor. Well, okay, you left the kitchen dirty. But if you don't do your job when you're taking care of an elderly person, they can die, It ain't no joke. And these people are being asked to do this work. These women, because it's almost always women, are being asked to do this work for peanuts while people make obscene profits off of their work. You know, as I say in the book, it's the third fastest growing business in the United States because Medicare and Medicaid have huge home health care expenses. The private agencies, it's people have to have it. That's the thing. It's you know, I just want to emphasize, I'm very, very fond of a phrase that a political scientist professor at the University of Minnesota says a lot, Joan Tronto. And she says the purpose of economic life is to support healthcare, not vice versa, not the other way around. The purpose of, you know, healthcare is not to support economic life. It's not to be a good business. It's not to be a business in which some yo-yo who's got $75,000 and he wants to invest somewhere, he starts a home health care agency to take care of old people. You know, this is not how it should be. So, I mean, whatever. These are realities, and they, you know, impact on millions and millions and millions of Americans every year. You know, both those 40 million people who are taken care for free of a family member, or the 2.5 million women that are working for minimum wage, doing the same thing. You know, these agencies, and historically, I'm sorry to go on about this, but these are things that I think are important for people to know. In 1965, when Lyndon Johnson created Medicare, up until 1980, home health care was considered to be something that nonprofits should do. It was not considered to be something really where there's a lot of money to be made. And then, coincidentally, not coincidentally, in 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected and immediately gave the green light to for-profit home health care agencies. And ever since then, things have been multiplying exponentially. You know, and it's just part and parcel of exactly that economic life should support healthcare in all of its formats. And healthcare is not in this world to support economic life, you know, to make lots of money for a handful of equity investors. I mean, it's tremendous. And part of this also is sort of a process from the 50s when hospitals were where you kind of, you know, you sent your father, your grandfather sick. They could spend weeks in a hospital just being taken care of. And hospitals were a big investment in those days, a very lucrative investment. Lots of investors spent a lot of money building hospitals, but it got too expensive, so they turned to nursing homes. Nursing homes were also cash cows. And if you look in 2007, 2006, 2005, you'll find equity investors saying there is no better investment in this world than a nursing home because people are going to get old and they're going to need it. But then, you know, now home health care, you don't need bricks and mortar like you need for a nursing home. You know, all you need is like, you can do it from home, an office, a bunch of women that you hire for minimum wage, you give them a week's training, and you send them out. And your overhead is much lower than with a hospital or nursing home. So this has just been kind of a progression, you know, of how to turn the necessity for all of us to get care for people into money. That's how, you know, so that's how I got more and more interested as I took this class and understood what these women were expected to do for their minimum wage. So,
yeah, it's especially heartbreaking because, you know, as you say, so many of the people who do this work are motivated by some deep spirit of generosity and caring and kindness, and they're being taken advantage of.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, they like the work because they know that they're making a real difference in somebody's life. They don't like to pay They don't like the fact that the benefits are skinny or non-existent. Another really interesting thing to me, Chris, that I found, as you know, 5 years ago I published a book about homeless families, about women trying to raise children homeless. And the more I learned about this, the more I realized that many of these women who are working as home health care aides have been homeless at some time in their life with their families. And I began to see that caregiving in being a home health aide is one way to begin to pull yourself out of extreme poverty. And there ain't that many ways to pull yourself out of extreme poverty if you are a woman with a couple of kids living in a motel room. But being a home health aide, for instance, where I was taking class, is a home health care agency, cooperative. They have 2,000 aides. They employ 2,000 aides. And at least half of those aides have been homeless with their families at some point in their lives. So in addition to sort of taking advantage of the fact that everybody needs it, people can really like their work. It also provides, all homeless mothers, not all of them will make good home health care aides, but some of them will. And we should be, in some way, taking advantage of what's kind of a vertical structure. Lots of municipalities that have homeless people living in the boundaries of their town or city, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't like it. It ain't right. But what can they do about it, particularly if rents are high, you can't find a place to put these people. One thing you can do about it is to sort of try and create a process by which women living in extreme poverty and trying to raise their kids can work as home health aides if they're good at it. And you're going to save a lot of people. You're going to take a lot of people out of extreme poverty. Joe Biden, as you may know, in the job plan for America, how much is it? $1.4 trillion. They've got $400 million set aside to dedicate to domestic workers, including home health care workers, to raise the minimum wage or raise their wages, to facilitate their organizing unions with the Service Employees Union, and to provide them with some benefits. Now, what's going to happen, of course, is that the people that are making these tremendous amounts of money off of home health care, they ain't going to stand for this shit. They're going to they already have a huge lobby, and the lobby is going to be, really pushing down hard, saying, you can't destroy this, employment will go down, we won't be able to take care of people if we have to pay them more than minimum wage, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that battle is about to play out, and people are going to have to stay strong. We'll see if Biden and his administration are capable of dealing with that, or if it's an underestimation of the kind that Hillary Clinton made when her husband tried to get universal health insurance passed. I think it's easy to underestimate the lobbying strength sometimes, and I think a lot of it will come to bear if they try to mandate decent wages and benefits for home health aides. So we'll see. Yeah. That's coming up.
You've always been extremely interested in the political situation in the United States, but you've been watching it from Spain for what, 30 years or something? How long have you been in Spain?
Long time, 25, 30 years, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were talking before I turned on the recording about vaccine skepticism and all that kind of stuff. And, I was in Spain altogether close to 20 years. It's weird to be here now. I got to say, I like watching it from a distance a lot more than I like being in the midst of it.
Well, I was raised in Nashville. And I was raised in Nashville when the sit-ins were going on and the civil rights movement. And Nashville was the spearhead of the civil rights movement. And that, I saw nonviolence in a very profound way that never left me. They really shaped me, and I was fortunate. My parents were both progressives, and, they had a bookstore, and so I was raised around books and ideas. But you grow up, they had a store downtown. I'd go out the door of my father's bookstore, and there'd be a serious sit-in going on, and people would be getting hurt and being nonviolent, and I was very impressed. So that's probably stayed with me, Spanish politics, I live in Barcelona, and of course, Catalan independence here, and etc. There's a whole different set of political questions here. But, it all boils down to the same shit. I mean, it does all, we got a right wing that's coming up here now, Vox, far right, fascist right wing. It's coming up. Franco. It's really the remnants of Francoism. Really? And they're growing every election in Spain. They're growing, just like, populism is, we've certainly seen what it can do in the United States. But these are cycles. You have to believe that these are cycles. I don't know. At any rate, people are going to keep on getting old, and they're going to keep on needing somebody to help because, 10,000 people turn 65 in the United States every day, and half of them will need help getting through those days just with the basics of cooking and cleaning and this and that and taking medicine. I don't know. I found that the more I looked into it and got involved with it and learned about home health care, the more I found it really, really an interesting, meaningful, important subject,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. You started, in the introduction, you talk about how you were researching a book about cooperatives, and that's how you sort of you were riding that horse and suddenly you're on a different horse going in a different direction. Do you intend to go back and work on that book about cooperatives, or is that in the distant past now?
It's probably in the distant past, although it's a really interesting subject. I have to say, I've gotten to the point where if I don't have some minimum wage encouragement from a publisher, I'm not inclined to spend I'm an old man, I'm going to spend 3 damn years writing a book about cooperatives if I can't find anybody that wants to publish it. And I've never actually found anybody who wanted to publish that book. But it's really interesting, the ejidos in Mexico. And as you know, Mondragon in the Basque country in Spain. Now, these are huge enterprises. Based on the idea that, everybody gets a little bit, and that the worker owns the company. And in the South Bronx, that company, where I took classes, they're the largest cooperative in the United States. And they have only 2,000 employees, and only half of those, more or less, are cooperative members. So you could say that the largest cooperative in the United States has maybe 1,500 at a good year, whereas in Mondragon, in the Basque country, it's 80,000, and half of the arable land being farmed in Mexico is in the hands of cooperative ejidos. So it is an interesting subject. It's certainly, in the U.S., is a long way from catching on,
Yeah.
In a country where even unions are so denigrated, the cooperative spirit, there's not a lot of it.
Yeah, it's perplexing, though, because, when you think about a sustainable, healthy, ethically, integrated future, it seems to me cooperatives are one of the obvious options, right? Where workers own the business. Like, how can that not be? That makes perfect sense, right? It's like, it's non-exploitative by nature because the actual workers own it. I don't understand why it's not more prevalent. What do you have any ideas on that?
I mean, I guess I would look to the diminishing presence of unions in this country. Why would a worker want to leave the decisions about how he's got to work, how much he's got to work, how much he get paid? Why would he want to leave those decisions to the people that own the business, whose natural interest is to pay him as little as possible, make him work as long as possible, etc.? I don't understand that. I really don't understand it. And being a conspiracist, I have to think that it's the end result of decades of consciously undermining and reformulating American thought. Just like we were talking before we started about vaccination. How can there be 1 out of every 4 or 5 Americans who doesn't want to get vaccinated against a disease in which you either suffer and die because you can't breathe? I mean, what could be more awful? How can you have so many people who don't want to wear a mask? By God, they don't see it as, they see it as an abridgment of their freedoms. Who they've probably never watched somebody in bed that can't breathe die. But in the same sense, to me, how can so many people not want to have a union where they work? How can the Amazon workers in Alabama? We know about from Nomadland, thanks to Jessica Bruder, we know how they treat their employees at Amazon. That they spend 10 hours on a concrete floor and they're 68 years old with a knee implant. I mean, why did they not want to unionize? Well, I'm sure that Amazon has its strategy and, was pretty tajante, pretty strong about letting the workers know that it wouldn't be good for them. But nevertheless, and cooperative's the same, it goes against the American grain. I mean, a cooperative is I don't think that has been ever sort of part of the fabric of American society, that sort of thought. Maybe it's to come. Maybe one way or another it will appear and grow. I mean, that's what we would hope, Yeah. What is it that King said? The arc of justice is long. I mean,
very long.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I've always had trouble with that quote. That it bends toward justice. I'm not so sure it does. I feel like it's bending in the other direction, but who knows? Maybe it's cyclical, as you say. Do you, with your perspective, I mean, not only you've been around the block a few times, but also you've lived a life that's very thoughtful and, you've researched all these different things and sort of followed your curiosity. You have, of everyone I know, you have one of the most well-informed perspectives that I can think of. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on in the world right now? Do you think is this pandemic a pivot point in history? Do you think it'll leave any sort of meaningful structural change, or do you think it's just a bump on the road and we'll just roll over it and keep going?
I never had less idea of what was going to happen. I think if people are able to, it'll just be a bump on the road. But to what extent virus and viruses are connected to environmental damage, who knows? Who knows? I mean, one could imagine, wouldn't be too hard to imagine, that we're at the last exit down the road is already gone by, and that we are irredeemably on a course which will, start life over again on the planet. That's possible, not impossible. On the other hand, it may be that this turns out to be like the Spanish flu or the plague. I don't think, if you look at 1920, after 2 years of Spanish flu, which was much worse because it took the young people instead of the old people. I mean, it took the babies. But I don't think, after a few years, I'm not sure that things looked a whole lot different than they did before the damn flu and the war. I mean, you read how it was in London in the 1600s or in Barcelona in the mid-1300s when there was plague, and it was awful. I mean, everything fell apart. Society was everything you counted on was gone. But, after a while, few generations, not many really, things were sort of hurtling down the road again. What do you think?
Yeah. I think it's amazing to me how sort of disposable people are. How, like in the United States, they're saying now that it's this 500,000 to 600,000 is an undercount. It's probably closer to 1 million people have died from COVID, and it's like nothing changes. It's just kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever, Bizarre, as you say. I mean, World War I. How many millions of people were killed in World War I, and 10 years later, everything's just kind of like back to normal. I'm like, holy shit. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, but a lot of people make a lot of money because, of course, there was between 1920 and 1929, a lot of people were making a whole lot of money and everybody was pretty happy. A lot of sort of middle-class people, too, were making a lot of money. Same thing may happen here.
It's happening already. The stock market's going crazy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bitcoin, everyone's making money on their fucking cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's Chief Seattle or one of those speeches that one of the American Indians gave when they were signing the final surrender, and he said something about how someday you'll realize you can't eat money. And it's so ironic to think, here's this, Bitcoin. I don't know how much you know about cryptocurrencies, and I don't know how much anyone knows about them, but Bitcoin is like, it's using as much energy as like Finland and Sweden and the Netherlands combined or something like that. It's just this massive amount of energy being used for nothing, for fucking nothing. And, the idea that we would end as a species, generating huge amounts of energy to create this imaginary, like, digital currency is just like, that's kind of the perfectly fitting end to this whole civilizational enterprise as far as I'm concerned. It's just like, going through the mirror, through Alice's mirror. Yeah. Through the looking glass.
Yeah. It sounds right. I try to resist. I think probably lots of people, when they get to be my age, think that the end is near. Not the end is certainly near for us, but I think people like to think that the end is going to be near for everybody else too. But God, if I can't make it, ain't nobody going to make it. So I try to resist apocalypso, calypso. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. How old are you now?
74. 74 going on 75. Huh?
Damn. Yeah, man.
That's some years, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, yeah. I'm turning 60 soon.
Shit, ain't nothing, son.
They keep telling me that.
Ain't nothing. No.
You always want to have friends who are older than you, so somebody will tell you you're young.
That's right. How is van life?
I'm about to set off in the van at the end of this month, so I got another 20 days. So, yeah, I'm in the process now of, painfully realizing how much crap I've accumulated in the last 6 months since I left the van and rented a house. So, yeah, whittling down, getting ready, and really, looking forward to it. It's a nice cycle, We spent the winter in a rented house here in Colorado, and that was nice to, have a kitchen and sort of And also winter in Colorado is beautiful, so that was beautiful. I haven't been in snow for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. So that was cool. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the van. It's very different. It's not a nomad land situation, obviously, because I'm choosing it. It's the difference between camping and being homeless is pretty significant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great. I love it. It enables me to kind of hold on to a bit of a hunter-gatherer perspective on things. Sit by a fire at night and look up at the stars and
great.
Jump in the river. It's great.
It sounds good to me living in Barcelona. It sounds excellent. Yeah.
How are things there? Is it? You mentioned the Catalan separatist thing, and it's the way news works. The only time I read about Barcelona is when there are riots in the streets. So it sounds like shit's melting down all the time over there. But,
yeah, there've been a few of those for sure. Yeah. You find it very familiar. It's pretty much the same struggle. Here, we were talking about this. 6-month state of emergency just ended this weekend. So during all that time, restaurants were closed at night. If you wanted to have supper from a restaurant, you had to get it to go. For a great deal of that time, they were closed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There were only a few hours when a restaurant was open. And there's a curfew. There was a curfew of 10 o'clock. Now, in Spain, people are just going out to supper at 10 o'clock. But no, the streets were empty. There was a curfew. You could hear the birds sing outside of the street. I live on a busy street. I had no idea how many birds lived here. But you could hear them out there like crazy. And, everything was shut down. You couldn't go out after 10. If you went out after 10, you were likely to be stopped by a cop and asked, what were you doing? And if you didn't have a good answer, you're going to get a fine. So it's been pretty tightly controlled here. Everybody has to wear masks. If they're outside or if they're in, you don't have to wear it in your house, but if you're inside at work or something, you have to have a mask on. There's been a lot of control, and now they've lifted the controls all at once, although the statistics are still pretty bad as far as contagion goes. But they lifted the restrictions all at once, and people are going, bullshit crazy. They think it means that the pandemic is over. And of course, if they behave that way for very long, the next wave of the pandemic will be here. But at least they're doing well, vaccinating a lot of people, not as many as the States, but they'll get there shortly. It's okay, but it's not the Barcelona that we knew or that we know.
Yeah.
It's been a tough year.
Yeah. I think that sense of community is even more important in Spanish culture than it is over here.
Absolutely. And family. Although, people have not been able to see their family. And the reality is that people had to die alone. Thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people had to die alone. So even if you weren't sick, if your mother, your father was sick and in the hospital dying, you couldn't go hold their hand, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult. So it's, and as you know, Spaniards in general are really, family oriented. We hug, how you meet somebody for the first time in Spain, you kiss them on both cheeks. You never met them before. You don't shake their hand, you kiss them, you hug them.
Yeah.
That's how they are.
Yeah.
And will that come back? We don't know. We'll see. After a year, 14 months of really being confined and locked down and not able to be that way, is that going to come back, or who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's hope. A lot of people are predicting it's going to be another roaring 20s, right? This comeback, both economically, but also in terms of just like debauchery. So I don't really give a shit about the economics, but I'm looking forward to some debauchery.
Yeah, it sounds good. Little debauchery.
A little debauchery. We deserve it. God damn.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely.
Hey, Richard, thank you for your time, brother. It's just really nice to hang out with you, but also I'm honored to know you.
Well, it's a pleasure. I feel the same way about you. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and let's do it in the near future.
Okay, Mom. Tell people what they can order from the garage.
Okay, in our cottage garage, we have lots and lots of T-shirts. Sex at Dawn, Civilized to Death, Vanthropology, Tangentially Speaking, Paleo Modern, and Talking Out of My Ass.
She didn't like saying that last one.
Then we now have some new things added. We've got beer cozies, or koozies, or whatever they're called.
Oh, Civilized to Death design.
They're all civilized
That's right.
to death.
We have stickers and car decals, right?
Yes.
Okay, there you have it. That's Julie, my mom.
He said